I'd say Veno was the best player in the world. Everyone kept saying that. Veno was the best. Veno was the best. You probably wouldn't even be able to see a difference that much between those mechanics back then and maybe like a tier 4 player now.
He was like idolized by his peers. A thread for us today. I saw a tweet from a friend of the show, FM Comp Report. And
not all our friends.
Okay. What are you saying?
Not all our friends. Yeah.
I didn't know there was some beef there, but okay, we'll get into that later. But it was basically he posted a clip of Veno talking about how, you know, Peterbot's better than him right now, but he believes he had the best peak of all time. And Comp Report asked the question, which Fortnite player do you think had the greatest prime of all time? I'm going to go through some of the responses and we will get quick reactions. And then afterwards, I'll ask you guys, who do you think had the greatest prime of all time? One of the first responses that I saw here, no surprise, was someone saying, whoever says anybody other than Mongrel is either a hater or has never seen Prime Fortnite back in the days.
How far are we going back? Are we, if World Cup, still no, but at least it's not that bad. But if he's talking about Stark season, I mean, we all all saw about it, but yeah.
And I have this controversial opinion, not even an opinion, because I've literally, Tayson literally agrees with me on this opinion. And I always say, like, Mongoose, Tayson, and Micho would not have won FNCS if they didn't land Stoic, you know? And like that, you could say, like, made by Dropsman and stuff, but, like, you know, you'd have to include player skill on top of that, and there's no way. There's so much more overarching domination than just a team that has probably one of the best spots in history.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think from competitive content, that Stark season was probably peak. Like, he had the biggest prime when it comes to like actual content and watching streams and everyone going into it. I think there's a conversation there where he probably had the most amount of viewers, the most amount of people wanting to watch him, and every stream was so entertaining to watch.
What did he peak at anyways on that stream?
Oh, it was over 100,000 short, like in that grand finals, if I remember.
The Savage Mongo and clicks of like Chapter 5 Season 1 might actually be close, no? They all hit like 100,000 plus.
Savage might be from the grand finals day one. He was on like 100 or 1,000.
And if it wasn't contested, it would have probably been a lot more. But yeah, he kept dying on spawn every single game.
Yeah, I mean, your opinion about Stark there, like that is not controversial amongst people who know the game well. Like
if you post that or say anything like that online, brother, you are getting controversial 100%. Like, people are angry if you talk about like how it's like the reason why they got Stark and contested was because they were good, right? Like, they were a good team. They're one of the best off-spawn fighters. You know, they were smoking Marion and the Dutchies, and then also the Danish guys. So that's why they got started. They were good in that regard, but like the other aspects, it was you can see the clips back then. It was messy.
Yeah, the idea that Mongrel carried them to the win or something that season, that's just ridiculous, because he wasn't the best player on the team, and
he wasn't. But you say that to Mongrel fans, and they tell you something very, very different. This guy that replied that will probably tell you something very
just
different.
Literally look at the next season of FNCS. What Mongrel did, and the season after. Right? I mean, if you can't call grounds the season after, you can't claim to be the best player in the region that season.
All I know is I'm looking at this guy's Twitter replies, and it's all NFT promo and giveaways he's replying to. So, like, his opinion is invalidated immediately because of that.
He's following Mongrel into the, having the ice bath in the morning, crypto evening,
Just making out the Matrix, man.
Maybe he's not talking about Stark season. That wasn't.
Maybe
he didn't mention Stark in that tweet.
Honestly,
Mongrel had better primes earlier than that.
I don't think he is, just because I think he got into a bit of an argument with somebody, and he mentioned the fact that Mongrel is the best to ever touch the game. He was literally getting interviewed by the BBC because of the way he played LMAO. I don't want to make this
a good authority on how well people play.
But also, I don't want to make this an attack on this guy, but he's quite clueless, because that actual BBC interview wasn't because Mongrel was so good. It was because Mongrel had been signed to Secret at the age of 13. It was like he was like the youngest like UK kid to be signed to a professional esports org That's why he got interviewed.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, let's not.
All I know is DJ was also interviewed by the BBC. You know, like they're giving interviews to everyone these days. So
you know what? I've been on BBC Radio myself, so
there you go.
Truly Mickey Mouse BBC then.
We had another person reply who had the greatest prime of all time, and they said probably Unknown Army. Chapter 2, season 1, squad season. Unknown, man. He was a different level. We've not seen many people hit those kind of heights.
He was crazy. I don't know if he was crazy or he was just crazy with the. Obviously, he was just crazy with the aim assist, right? It was like watching every cash cup. It actually felt like we were watching someone with aimbot just play every tournament. It was ridiculous seeing him, just the beams he'd get with it. But he was insane that season.
He won FNCS was stable, right?
Season before he
won FNCS. Then after that, I think he had like the crazy run in like solo cups and stuff because was just broken. Yeah. So like around that time period, not just that season, but
almost every prime is going to be somewhat carried by the game, the state of the game at that time as well.
For sure.
Like, I'm sure some of the ones we're going to go through, we can comment on a particular drop spot they're at or some sort of other meta. Yeah, he had aim assist, but he was like 100 times better than any other controller player at the time, so you have to respect that.
Yeah, literally, it was. That was probably one of the earliest times where you see just one player who looks a level above the rest of the lobby, and it's not even close when you're getting into high elo lobbies. Like he is just running through top level players like they're just top 10k players.
Some of those like clips of like the org were just insane. Like just him just bursting people on like mid ground layers like they weren't even there was just ridiculous. We'll go for another one. Somebody said Veno and Queasy first Elite Cup season.
Ooh, what season was that?
So
that's season 1.
That's like, wasn't that chapter 3? That's
chapter 3, season 4.
Yeah. So like before Invitational.
Season
like around that period in time.
Invitational season.
Because they like won a bunch of cups going into Invitational, right?
And they didn't do well in grand finals, right? Like they had like a crazy run where they just won everything elite and then they didn't win grands. Is that the one?
I think that was the season after. No, that's season 1 of chapter 4.
Yeah, because I don't think was there not a grands in season 4 because of the fact that it's
just invitational.
It's just invitational, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was just invitational.
But
so
I'm not sure
like
which elite cups they dominated.
I think it was like almost all of them they did really well in.
Yeah.
Like they did really well in all the Elite Cups, and that's why they were like one of the favorites going into Invitational because they had been bossing the Elite Cups.
I remember them being favorites in Chapter 4, Season 1, mostly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Like, they did really well in that one, and then they whiffed it. Yeah,
but then they won the next season.
Strong,
Yeah, so I just looked at their placement. So I was looking at Chapter 3, Season 3. They won one EU. They basically like this is towards the end of that season. They won EU in week 4, won second in week 5, and then week 6 they won EU and NA, and then fourth.
Yeah, so that's the period that person's talking about. I mean,
I just don't think it's there
before Invitational. Like he thinks that's the best he's ever played. But yeah, it's interesting to me because I think a lot of people obviously would just naturally say the 6 out of 12 grands win, but he thinks it was around that Invitational time.
Was that 6 out of 12? Was that season 2 or season 3?
Season 2.
Season 2. Yeah, season 3.
It was major 2.
And then season 3 they didn't qualify, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny how there's a gap in between that. Well, I know for a fact that season 2 was one of the seasons where they were one of the most hardworking, right? Like they did everything. They VOD reviewed. They played every single scrim. If the scrim was dead, they just to make you the best. It's hard to put like we're talking about player prime. That's like duo prime. Like were they individually both the best players at the time? Probably, maybe.
I think that probably is. I think that probably is their prime. Like it's weird because they hit a bigger peak later, but like in terms of like consistency and what they were doing, like it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean individually they were regarded as the best IGL and the best fragger in the world. Right?
Yeah.
That thing.
Yeah, wasn't it like
3 seasons in a row or something?
Yeah, wasn't it chapter 3 you started them, like end of chapter 3, and Veno was just like top of every single one without fail.
Yeah,
he was the only one breaking 2 damage ratio when no one else could.
Yeah.
Like it was ridiculous back then.
Yeah, no, 100%. He was crazy back then. Somebody else said Tfue. Now, again, I don't want to, obviously, where this is taken into consideration all of like Fortnite. I don't think there was ever a point where Tfue was the best player, but like when Tfue was like on that early like phase roster, like back in like the squad times and stuff, like he had you see like what Marius had at the start of like last season, where it's like nothing goes wrong, you know, like just everything always goes right. He sort of had that type of effect back then. So I could see why somebody would say like back then. Obviously, he did keep playing comp for like a while, right? He obviously was one of the first people to play with like, he put on a lot of people. That was always the thing, right? Everyone was like, Tfue put on everyone. It was like Scout, Canada, right? He played on a squad with Canada and a couple other like NA like talents that were really good. So shout out to Tfue, man. He's a legend of comp, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, his peak came at a time. I mean, I would say like prime Tfue was basically 2018.
Yeah,
like in the skirmish stuff. But the problem with that time is that was very limited to NA content creators, the public comp scene, and they probably weren't the best players in the world. I don't know. I wasn't involved in like the EU scrimming scene back then, but there were probably better players already on EU that just weren't really getting the chance.
As someone who was there,
imagine maybe.
As someone who was there were much better players on EU. Well, like you have to even when you look at the skirmish times, like Mitra was still doing really well, and he was like a top EU player back then. Savage was really good back then, but he just wasn't as big. Mongrel was really good back then. He was big, so I wouldn't say he wasn't as big, but like there were definitely better players back then.
Yeah, and like Friday Fortnite times as well. You know, back then where there was a lot of players around there where like Kill Races was kind of showing who was actually the best players, you know, like that was a kind of time. So it's a completely different sort of, you know, conversation to be had of competitively who's the best and who was just the best, like kind of like content creators we're talking about, right? And Tfue, everyone watched to learn from Tfue, to be honest. He was the guy you'd watch.
We still call it Tfue peaking.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Well, there was a point where he was the guy that everyone saw there was like a new exploit out, and he would be the first one to learn it, right? He had such a high skill ceiling to being able to adapt and find different ways of abusing random things. Like there's a point where you had to throw out an emote so you could double swing on a tree, so double front trees over before, right? Like things like that. He was so good at, and it was so fast at picking up that it made sense that he was going to be like a good competitive player at some point. Until he became too rich to care, which happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, it happens to so many people, man. So many. All right, who else we got here? Somebody in the thread said Free Pete Booger, Chapter 2, Season 1 unknown, Chapter 2 Epic Well, and he named a bunch of other people. But yeah, we've not mentioned Booger yet. Obviously, Booger sort of like won World Cup, and then after that, in like most of Chapter 2, did like nothing of significance. And then like the back end of Chapter 2 into Chapter 3 just went crazy. Would you say that was Booger's prime? And like where do you stack up, you know, Free Pete Booger and
I still think his World Cup's probably his prime, obvious. Like in comparison to how everyone else was playing, he was so far above. But when you've just won $3 million and you're getting onto every TV show, every talk show, you know, Fortnite goes on the back burner a little bit. You know, you're probably not as motivated. You're probably not grinding as much. So I can see why towards this, you know, start of Chapter 2, it wasn't as good. And then at the end, when you realize, oh shit, you know, I got lucky and all those sort of things, he was just a level above everyone else, right? He was just completely so far above. The way he played his moving zones, right? Where no one really knew. It was kind of everyone was playing random and you could see him, the way he was playing them, like it was so consistent and it was just something we hadn't seen before.
If you look at the YouTube videos from before World Cup of the montages, you probably wouldn't even be able to see a difference that much between those mechanics back then and maybe like a tier 4 player now, right? Like his mechs felt pretty advanced back then compared to the rest of it, but
especially honestly, when you could replace cones every time.
Yeah. But honestly, like the fact that he won $3 million and still plays this game, like shout out to Booger, man. I'll be on an island somewhere, like you know, just investing my money in something and getting back like 5%. Like I'm good after that.
Yeah, I would agree with you in what you're saying, there, Harry. Where it's like, yeah, he might have had like not more success or more success than World Cup, but like in terms of just the amount of tournaments won and like a good stretch and a good run of performances. I think World Cup would probably still be his peak in terms of just like as an individual, him relative to everyone else. Because when he was winning a bunch of mirrors, like you would argue Miro's better than him or Miro had a bigger impact, whatever. I think one of the interesting things about Booger and is it's a good thing you mentioned that group where it's like, you know, Mex being so good. He was like idolized by his peers for like that reason. I remember there'd be a bunch of like top level like tier 2 EU pros and even some of the tier 1 EU players who genuinely were like waiting for every Bugha highlight video just to see his Mex. Like they were like, he has the most satisfying Mex in the game. And if anything, if we're like reminiscing and looking back, it's actually kind of a shame how early chapter 2 went for him, because I remember during squad season, I was watching him. I think he was playing with Stretch and maybe like Avery and Twyfo or something like that. It was like a weirder squad. Maybe Clarity G was in that squad as well. I'm not too sure. But that squad, I remember watching because he streamed everything, and he was still the best player in NA. Like he was. I don't even know if the VODs are still there, but like you go back and he was solo so much. Like there'd be so many tournaments where it's like just everyone dies. He's solo trying to clutch up somehow, and then, you know, blah, 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 you move on. Yeah, shout out to Bugha, man. Shout out to Bugha.
Yo, if you enjoyed that video, make sure to click the link in the top right here. You can check out the full podcast where we waffle a little bit more about competitive Fortnite. And if you do enjoy it, make sure to subscribe as well.